Hi, I'm Andy Jones, your host for Art Talk. And I have literally taught thousands of people to paint. If you have any desire to paint, I can show you how to do it. I'm joined in studio today by my good buddy, Stephen White. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Andy, you ready to tiptoe through the tulips today?
I am so ready, Tiny Tim. We are going to do that, and so sad that Miss Vicky isn't here with us today, but we're going to get going in just a minute. Today, we're going to be painting a fairly graphic style design of springtime tulips, and we're painting it on a 12 by 12 canvas, which I have divided into two sections. I've got a dark burgundy area and a bright red area. So I've painted the bright red area with a couple of coats of apple red. I created a burgundy color with some apple red and just a tiny bit of pure black and painted the top with that. I am going to put out a little bit of hot saffron on my palette, and I'm also going to put out a little bit of apple red. We are going to kind of just change up these solid areas of color and give them a little bit of kind of movement or visual interest. So I'm going to start with some hot saffron, and I'm just going to brush some of this on in kind of a random pattern. And that's looking a little more orange than I want it to. So pick up a little apple red and we can tone that color down. This isn't supposed to be anything in particular. It is only a change of color and value in the background.
In the video industry, we call that texture.
Okay, we call it texture in the art industry too.
Look at that, we're not that different.
No, absolutely not. People often confuse us for twins. I'm not.
I heard they were going to star us in the new remake of Twins.
So do I get to be Arnold?
What do you think?
Yes, because I'm taller.
Correct.
All right, so we've got some texture down here. And so now I'm going to take some apple red and put some up here at the top. And I'm not using a lot of paint, just enough to have it show up as a different color. I have positioned my design on my canvas, and if I was smart, I would put a little piece of tape there to hold it in place, but I'm not smart. But I do have a piece of white transfer paper, and I want to make sure that I put the side that's going to transfer down, so I just do a little test mark, and it is transferring. So I'm going to slide this underneath my design, and I can move this around as I need to. And I'm going to begin to just go over my pattern lines. And let me show you that this does indeed transfer them to the canvas. All right, we have transferred all of our pattern lines to our canvas now, and I'm going to put out a little bit of titanium white. So I'm using a 3/4 inch flat brush. Use the largest brush that you are comfortable using. The bigger the brush, the quicker you will be able to accomplish this. And I'm simply using titanium white, and I don't have to have a perfect opaque coverage, but I really do want to try to eliminate all of this bright red because our tulips are not bright red. Now, I know, Stephen, with your extensive gardening background, have you planted tulips before?
That's, I've planted so many flowers in my days. And you know this about me.
Of course.
How much I garden and my green thumb.
Yes, I hear about your gardening all the time.
Oh my gosh, they can't get me to stop talking about it. I have not planted tulips.
Okay. Tulips at one point were the hottest flower around. And there was a thing called, say it with me, Tulip Mania. This is where the garden nerds lost control of their sensibilities. One of the things that the wealthy aristocrats acquired were unusual plants. And they didn't really care where these plants came from, but they loved to show off their exotic plants in their elaborate greenhouses and gardens on their estates. The Dutch merchant class decided that tulips were going to be their thing. And they started kind of spending crazy amounts of money on tulips. And they would buy a tulip bulb that cost more than most people's houses, all in hopes of having the most beautiful and the most unusual tulips.
When was this?
This was in the 1600s. Now we're going to have to do some tulip time math. So the most expensive tulip was the Semper Augustus tulip. In the day, this was the most expensive tulip that was ever sold. The tulip bulb cost back then about $350 to $400 for the bulb. Counting for inflation, that same tulip bulb today would have been $26,986.
Jeez.
For one tulip bulb. And of course, it basically looks like an onion. So there's a story of a sailor who went to a merchant's house, and the merchant was offering him some food, and the sailor goes, "This little Dutch sandwich would be so much better with some onion on it." So he pinched a tulip bulb, thinking it was an onion. And what tulip do you think he snatched?
I would assume the one that costs 27 grand.
That's exactly what happened. Things did not end well for the sailor. But such was the way of tulip mania. It was probably the first real economic bubble and bust. So this design is kind of graphic in its style. So I'm going to start by painting in some of the shadows. So I'm going to use a little pure black and a little true burgundy. And I'm going to use a number 12 flat brush. And I'm going to pick up some water on my brush because I want to make this a transparent kind of wash of color. So add some true burgundy to this little puddle of water I had on my palette, and a little tiny bit of pure black. And really, I thought I was going to add the right amount. That might be okay. We'll see. And we'll do a quick test here on the canvas to see if that color is dark enough. And it's not quite dark enough there, but let's see how it is here. And this looks really nice. So you can see that we have our shadow color dark enough to go over the red portion of the canvas. And so I just turn my painting around so that it's easy for me to put the edge of the brush next to the edge of my shadow. And then I'm going to fill it in as smoothly and evenly as I can. And I'm going to continue to do this anywhere I have a shadow, especially that's going over the red area of the canvas. And it's perfectly fine to let some of that dark color come back into the tulips if it helps you get a nice even shadow on your canvas. And I can tell you that these shadows are not exactly the way a shadow would fall on a tulip, but anybody who's looking at this painting gets the idea that it's a shadow, and no one's going to question you. Okay, so we've got the shadows on our red area all done, and let's simply darken this a little bit more by adding a bit more pure black. So when I put this on this area of the canvas now, it is nice and dark. And we're just going to fill in the last couple of shadows here. I'd like to take a minute to thank Plaid Enterprises for sponsoring Art Talk. They are the makers of folk art acrylics, which I absolutely love using. I've used this paint since I was a young tot, and now that I'm an old fart, I still use this paint. We have a 17-piece set that we've curated just for you. Ordering information is in the description below, and we also have great brushes for you. We have a 7-piece set of Folk Art Select Firm Bristle brushes. These are absolutely incredible. I use them every time I paint. And I've never done that in my entire life. Now, let's get back to our video. All right, we have our shadows are nice and dry, and we're going to move on to our tulip leaves and stems. I'm going to make a green And then I'm going to brush mix my homemade green in with some folk art thicket. I'm putting out medium yellow on my palette, small amount of pure black to my medium yellow, and this is going to give me a nice kind of olive green color. If you look carefully at the big leaves on here, there's a lot of dark, but then the interesting part is the highlight. And so we're going to keep the undercoat fairly subtle and maybe, Stephen, a little bit on the boring side.
Uh-oh.
Yep, I mean, every color can't be the star. All right, so that's the dark green that I've made, and I'm going to put out a little folk art thicket. It's a little bluer green, but they're both pretty much a dark value green. So pick up some of both of these green colors and just kind of brush mix between them. And I'm going to simply fill in my leaf shapes with this green color. All right, so we are just continuing to undercoat leaves and stems with our brush mixture of the olive green color that we made and thicket. Now that our leaves and stems are dry, we are going to shade them. And again, I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch flat brush because I want to do this as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to just kind of pick up a little bit of my homemade olive green and my thicket. And then I'm going to sneak one edge of the brush into pure black. So if I'm patting this color here on my palette, you can see that I've got a dark edge and then it migrates into my green colors. And we're going to put this wherever we need to have shading on a leaf or a stem. So let's take our dark edge and put it where one stem crosses another. And then we just pat that color back. So I'm going to pick up more of that same shading color, and we're going to put that on the stem that's to the back. And then we simply tap and pat that color out. So we've created an area where this stem is now obviously laying on top of that stem. And I'm going to take that same dark color and put it right next to this tulip and where the tulip stem joins the flower. And if you load your brush like this, you're doing most of the work right here on the palette, and it's very easy to translate what you've got on the palette to your painting. Just pat that dark color on and soften it back. Very, very easy. And we just move around the painting, applying our dark shading, as I said, where a tulip stem joins a flower or where it goes underneath another leaf or stem. All right, Stephen, we've mentioned Tiny Tim a little bit, and Miss Vicki. Can you relate any modern day celebrities to that kind of crazy celebrity happening? You know, because they did end up getting married on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That's where their wedding was.
The first person that comes to mind as a modern version of Tiny Tim, and this isn't a one-to-one relation in terms of the sound of their music. Do you know who Grimes is?
I do not.
Grimes was married to Elon Musk, and she makes really weird, experimental, sort of like electronic music.
Okay, so not Bjork.
Not quite Bjork. Bjork is also a good sort of connector between Tiny Tim and the modern day. But I would say Grimes has more creepiness, and Tiny Tim was kind of creepy.
All right, so we are just finishing up putting our shading on. Okay, I've just put out some medium yellow on my palette in preparation for highlighting my leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and put out a little lime green as well. So we can highlight in a number of different ways. We can highlight with our brush and with our palette knife, and we're going to do both on here. It's probably a little easier to highlight our stems with our brush, and then to highlight our leaves with our palette knife. So I'm going to be using a number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to take some of my leaf color, which is just a brush mixture of my olive green and thicket, and I'm going to pick up some medium yellow and a little bit of lime green. And I don't want too much paint on my brush, so I am going to wipe some of the excess paint off of my brush. Now, we're going to start to highlight our stems where one stem crosses over another. So we are going to brush a small amount of this color on and then not pick up any more color and let it feather out in each direction. All right, so that is the first stage of highlighting. I think I have too much paint on my brush. So you want less paint on your brush than you think you should have. So everywhere I want my stems to be a little brighter, I'll start there and simply pat a very scant amount of the color on the stem. Okay, so we have kind of highlighted our stems with the first layer of light color. So I'm going to pick up more medium yellow and a little bit of lime green. Not going to add any more of the original undercoat color. And I'm going to wipe most of that paint off of my brush, and we will just tap and soften in a little bit of this brighter color. And I'm covering a smaller area so I can do this even faster than the first layer of highlights. And now I'm going to pick up a little bit more lime green and medium yellow, again making a really nice light color. And I want a very small amount of paint on the brush, and we'll come back and just tap on our brightest highlights. And it doesn't take much paint. The less paint you have on your brush, the better off you will be. So we've highlighted our stems now, and I think they're looking pretty good. Let's come to this little flipped over portion of our tulip leaf. Now, Stephen, did you know that the really expensive tulips during Tulip Mania were developed not by hybridizing the tulips, but oftentimes by injecting a disease into the bulb?
No, that's wild.
So aphids actually,
The little bugs
got into the tulip bulbs and made our Semper Augustus tulip. Don't laugh at me that I'm looking at my cue card. Our Semper Augustus tulip was created by the help of little aphids. So tiny little bugs made a $30,000 tulip bulb. I mean, nature is crazy and people are even crazier. All right, so I'm highlighting this little portion of our tulip leaf where it kind of rolls back over, and I'm going to take some more paint off of there so that I can just lightly tap and pat this highlight and have it blend out very smoothly. And I can add the start of some highlighting here at the end of this leaf, and you can see where the color really just clings to the weave of the canvas. And we'll put some more back here. And I'm brushing pretty aggressively here, but because there's such a small amount of paint on my brush, I'm not getting a glob on the canvas. Wouldn't you agree, Tiny Tim?
I almost did a Tiny Tim voice, but I decided not to embarrass myself.
All right, so now we've started our highlights on our leaves, and I'm going to use my palette knife because I think it really gives a nice, interesting effect. And again, we don't want too much paint. So I like to put the paint on the back of my palette knife. So I'm going to take a little lime green and a little medium yellow, and we're just going to kind of make a light color here. And then note that I'm just tapping and patting until I have almost no paint. That's not much paint, but it still might be more than I want. And I'm going to lay my palette knife flat down on the surface, and you can see that I don't have too much paint because it's kind of sputtering off and really just giving me this nice lacy highlighted effect. If you have too much paint, you're going to end up with a glob on your painting. So lay down your palette knife very neatly and carefully where you want your highlight to be. And then you can see that there's virtually nothing left on that palette knife. And we put our palette knife down right where we want it to be, bright. And we lay on a little bit of a highlight. Now, I can come back and strengthen this highlight simply by applying more paint. Now, be careful when you start to do this because you still don't want a big glob of paint on your tulip leaves. I'm picking up some lime green now by itself, tapping the excess off on my palette, and then I'm just quickly adding a lime green highlight. And if I want something even lighter than what I have, I can add sunny yellow to my palette. And I can pick up a little sunny yellow, which is lighter than my medium yellow, and mix that with this lime green color. And I am simply making a lighter highlight color. And then I'm going to come back to my tulip leaf and very quickly add a brighter highlight on there. So we're almost done with our stems and leaves. And I think we are. So we've got some bright highlights. We've got our stems all painted in, and we will be back to paint our tulips. Okay, we have previously undercoated our tulips. They are nice and dry, and I'm going to start to put out a number of different colors out on my palette. So let's put out some mandarin. Let's put out some hot pink. That was tickled pink. Let's put out a little pumpkin. 2 different pinks and 2 different oranges out. And because my pink colors are going to be a little bit more transparent, I'm going to add just a touch of white to both pinks. So let me put out a little more white. All right, so I'm just going to add a little dab of white to each of my pink colors, and that's going to help me have a little bit more opacity. We are going to undercoat our tulips with different varieties of pink and orange. So I'm going to do these 2 tulips up here with some orange, and I can either use mandarin or pumpkin or a combination of both. And we're going to very quickly fill in our tulip shapes. And you could see how nice this covers over that white undercoat. And some people will tell you you shouldn't undercoat or that's cheating. I don't think if you get to a good end point, I don't really think anything is cheating too badly. Again, just fill in your tulip shape as quickly as you can using long, broad strokes. And I can shift mid-flower. So I've gone from orange and now I'm picking up pink. And then just softly blending where those 2 colors come together. All right, I'm going to put out a little bit more true burgundy, and I'm also going to put out a little bit of maroon. So this just gives me 2 different colors, 2 different options to shade my tulips with. And I'm going to be using a 1-inch flat brush. Go ahead and use a big old brush. All right, so I'm loading the corner of my brush with some maroon, and my brush is fairly damp. I'm going to blot some of that excess moisture off. And we are going to very simply add shading where one tulip goes underneath another one. So where this tulip flower is going under this other one, we're going to pat this shading color on and soften it out into the flower. And I'm going to pick up a little true burgundy on my brush for some variety. And we're going to shade where this flower goes behind this other flower. And once again, we're simply going to tap and pat this color out so that we don't have a harsh shading line. The hard part's done. Now let's separate a couple of our tulip petals, again with the true burgundy and maroon on one corner of our brush. And if it's feeling a little dry, you can pick up some moisture on your brush, blot it on your towel, and then soften the color on your palette. And I'm going to basically separate one big petal from another here. And by having a big brush, we can do this really quickly and easily. So just tap and pat that color out into the petal. And then we can shade at the bottom of our flower where it joins the stem. Get some dark color in there. And because I'm using a big brush, I can cover a lot of ground pretty quickly. Let's divide one petal from another here. And because my brush is really big, I'm just using a portion of it. And I can bring that color right down to the bottom of my flower and then shade this front petal. We are making quick work of putting this shading on our tulips, and we're able to do that because we've got a really big brush. And we'll shade a back petal from the front petal of our tulip. Alright, so we're going to shade the bottom of this flower. Just start up on the chisel edge and then bring that dark color across. And we'll just tap and pat that shading on. And let's shade where this little petal is hiding right here. And then we'll pat that color out very quickly. And we can bring a little bit more of this shading up from the bottom just by quickly tapping and patting that color on. So we're going to let that shading dry so that we don't mess it up when we start highlighting our flowers. Now that our shading on our tulips is dry, we can start to add all of the flashy, kind of sparkly highlights to our tulip. And we're going to do it the same way that we did on our leaves using our flexible metal palette knife. So it doesn't really matter what color you start with or how you choose to do this. I'm going to pick up a little of this light orange color on my palette knife and tap it on the palette so that I don't have much paint on my palette knife. Stephen is going to attest to the fact that there's not much paint there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Would you go so far as to say very little?
I would say very little.
Okay, that's what we want. All right, so I'm going to pick an area on my tulip, and I've picked the same color I had used before, which is not a good idea.
Uh-oh.
I'm just going to add some sunny yellow to that and mix it here on the palette, making sure I don't have much paint at all. And when I bring this to my tulip now, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that orange back into it because my petal here is a little bit darker. Again, not much paint on my palette knife, and I'm simply going to put my palette knife down and add a highlight on that petal. And I can add a little bit more sunny yellow to this, making it a little lighter and brighter over here, and set my palette knife down and move it around my tulip. So let's pick up a little bit of pink on our palette knife and find a little area right down here I think would be appropriate for a little bit of a bright pink highlight. So let's put out a little desert flower on our palette. And I'm also going to put out a little pink melon. So whatever colors you want to work with, you can absolutely add to your flower. And again, picked up the paint. This is pink melon, and I'm tapping it out on my palette so that I can come right here on my tulip and I can lay down some darker pink tones. And then I can come back with some of my brighter pink and add a bit of a highlight. So I can lighten up any of my pink colors with the addition of some titanium white. What you want to make sure to do is to always tap on your palette so that you know that you don't have too much paint on your brush or on your palette knife, as it were. You can see that you can easily add brighter, lighter pink colors to your flowers. And just building up lighter areas of color. You can see how the addition of that white really does make this yellow a bit brighter and lighter. And if you have a big pink tulip, you can absolutely come back and add yellow highlights to that. In fact, it's probably going to look a little better if you do have some yellow in your pink or your pink in your orange. Now, we're always going to look and evaluate and see what we might want to change on our tulip. And I definitely want this flower to get some lighter, brighter highlights on it. So I'm going to take some sunny yellow and some titanium white, and we're going to mix up a lighter yellow color. Pat the excess off on our palette, and we're just going to give that flower some light yellow love. Now, I'm pretty happy with the way these tulips look. They're bright, they're festive, they're spring-like. And so I want to dry all of these highlights, and that way we won't mess them up. We are going to add some blue accents to our pink and orange tulips. And I've put some Calypso Sky out on my palette, and I'm picking up a small amount of that on my number 12 flat brush. And I want to take a little bit of the excess off on my towel because I don't want much blue on my brush at all. And what we're going to do is pick a little area, and we are going to, just like we highlighted our stems, we're going to take a little bit of this blue color, and we are going to just kind of dry brush a little blue on some of our tulips. I'm going to pick up some Calypso Sky on my brush, take the excess off on my shop towel, and we are going to add some blue accents to our tulip. And again, we want to put a hazy amount of color on our tulip and let it just trail off. We don't want solid areas of color. And we are going to come back and we're going to lighten this blue a little bit. So this is just the first layer of blue accents that we're adding. We're just wisping this color on, and we want to be able to see through our blue accent. So not too much paint. It's been the hallmark of this whole lesson is not too much paint.
We're literally tiptoeing through the tulips.
Literally. All right, so we are just continuing to add these little blue accents. And I assure you we are coming back with a lighter blue over these. This is really a lot of fun to just kind of wake up a painting with these sort of little rogue color accents. Okay, I think I'm going to force myself to call this done. So thanks for being with me, Tiny.
You're welcome. I was going to do a tiny voice, but I just stop myself every time.
It's okay. There's no need to embarrass yourself.
Thanks.
Stephen and I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Art Talk, and want to remind you that the link to the downloadable design as well as the Art Talk kit is in the description box below. Be sure to leave a comment, or if you'd like to leave us a compliment, you can email us at art_talk@plaidonline.com.